Imagine waking up one morning as a free man, and going to sleep that night as a convicted murderer. Imagine spending the next 20 years behind bars for a crime you didn't commit, while the real killer walked free, living their life, going to barbecues, celebrating birthdays, maybe even having children of their own. This isn't a nightmare. This is the true story of Marcus Thompson, a man who lost 2 decades of his life because police needed to close a case, and the truth didn't matter as much as their conviction rate. What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible in a country that promises justice for all, but every single word is true. And the most terrifying part? It happens more often than you think. Marcus Thompson was 23 years old in the summer of 1995. He lived in a small apartment on the south side of Detroit, Michigan, working 2 jobs to support his girlfriend, Lisa, and their 9-month-old daughter, Amaya. Marcus worked the morning shift at an auto parts factory and picked up evening shifts at a local grocery store, stocking shelves until midnight. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He was just a young father trying to build a life. Friends described Marcus as quiet, hardworking, and devoted to his little girl. His coworker, James Patterson, later testified that Marcus talked about Amaya constantly, showing everyone pictures he kept in his wallet. He had dreams of saving enough money to move his family to a better neighborhood. Maybe even buy a small house one day. Lisa remembers those days fondly, despite how hard they were. Marcus would come home exhausted every night, she said in a 2015 interview. But he'd always pick up Amaya, kiss her forehead, and tell her he was building a better future for her. He was a good man. The best man I'd ever known. On August 14, 1995, Marcus finished his evening shift at the grocery store at 11:45 p.m. Security footage, which would later become crucial evidence, showed him clocking out, waving to his manager, and walking to his car in the parking lot. He drove the 15-minute route home, the same route he took every single night. He had no idea that his entire life was about to be destroyed. That same night, just 3 miles from Marcus's apartment, a horrific crime took place. 67-year-old Robert Mitchell was murdered during a robbery at his corner convenience store. Robert had owned Mitchell's Market for 32 years, serving the community, knowing his customers by name, giving credit to families who were short on cash. Around 11:30 p.m., someone entered the store, demanded money from the register, and when Robert complied, they shot him twice in the chest. Robert died before the ambulance arrived. He left behind a wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. The community was devastated. Robert Mitchell was beloved. People left flowers outside the store. Children drew pictures and left them on the sidewalk. The pressure on the Detroit Police Department to solve this murder was immense. The local news covered the story every single night. Robert's family appeared on television, begging for information, for justice. The police needed to find someone. Fast. Detective Raymond Walsh was assigned to lead the investigation. Walsh was a 20-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department, known for his high conviction rate. But that conviction rate came at a cost that nobody talked about publicly. Walsh had a reputation among defense attorneys for cutting corners, for pushing witnesses, for being more interested in closing cases than finding the truth. But the department loved him because he got results. 3 days after Robert Mitchell's murder, Detective Walsh focused his investigation on Marcus Thompson. Why? Because an anonymous caller told police they saw someone matching Marcus's general description near the store that night. The description was vague at best. A black male in his 20s, average height, wearing dark clothing. In a city like Detroit, this description could have matched thousands of people. But Detective Walsh decided it matched Marcus Thompson. Walsh discovered that Marcus drove past Mitchell's Market every night on his way home from work. That route took him within 2 blocks of the store. Walsh decided this made Marcus a suspect. Never mind that it was literally the most direct route from Marcus's workplace to his home. Never mind that thousands of people drove past that store every single day. On August 17th, just 3 days after the murder, Detective Walsh brought Marcus in for questioning. Marcus agreed to come to the police station voluntarily. He had nothing to hide. When Detective Walsh told him they were investigating Robert Mitchell's murder, Marcus was confused but cooperative. He told them exactly where he'd been that night, at work until 11:45, then straight home. I didn't understand why they were asking me these questions, Marcus later recalled. I told them I was at work. I told them my manager could verify it. I told them there were cameras. I thought once I explained everything, I could go home. But Detective Walsh didn't want an explanation. He wanted a confession. The interrogation lasted 11 hours. Marcus asked for a lawyer multiple times during those 11 hours. The transcripts, which were finally released years later, show Marcus saying, "I think I need a lawyer," at least 7 times. Each time, Detective Walsh either ignored the request or told Marcus that asking for a lawyer made him look guilty. "Innocent people don't need lawyers, Marcus," Walsh said at one point. "You're just making this harder on yourself." This was a lie. Everyone has the constitutional right to an attorney. But Marcus was 23 years old, scared, exhausted, and didn't know his rights well enough to stand firm. Around hour 8 of the interrogation, Detective Walsh changed tactics. He told Marcus that they had a witness who saw him at the store. This was a lie. They had no such witness. He told Marcus that his fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Another lie. He told Marcus that if he just confessed, the prosecutor would be lenient, maybe even let him go home to his daughter. All lies. By hour 11, Marcus was mentally and physically exhausted. He'd been awake for over 24 hours. He hadn't eaten. He'd been in that interrogation room so long he'd lost track of time. Detective Walsh kept promising that if Marcus just admitted to being there, if he just explained what happened, he could go home. So Marcus, broken and desperate, said what Detective Walsh wanted to hear. "Fine," Marcus said. "I was there. I was at the store." The moment those words left his mouth, Detective Walsh smiled. He had his confession. The interrogation ended. But Marcus didn't go home. He was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. Marcus tried to take it back immediately. "I didn't kill anybody," he said as they handcuffed him. "I just said what you wanted me to say. I was at work. Check the cameras. Please check the cameras." But Detective Walsh didn't check the cameras. At least, not carefully enough. The prosecution's case against Marcus Thompson was built almost entirely on that coerced confession. They had no physical evidence connecting Marcus to the crime. His fingerprints weren't found at the store. The murder weapon was never recovered. No DNA evidence linked him to the scene. But they had that confession, and in 1995, confessions were considered gold in courtrooms. Marcus's court-appointed attorney was overworked and underprepared. Public defenders in Detroit at that time were handling impossible caseloads, sometimes representing over 100 clients at once. Marcus's attorney, David Chin, was a good man who cared about justice, but he was drowning in work. Chin tried to argue that the confession was coerced. He pointed out that Marcus had asked for a lawyer multiple times. He tried to get the confession thrown out. But the judge ruled that Marcus's requests for an attorney weren't clear enough, weren't definitive enough. The confession would be allowed as evidence. Chin presented the security footage from the grocery store showing Marcus at work until 11:45 p.m. He presented testimony from Marcus's manager, who confirmed Marcus worked until closing that night. He showed the route Marcus drove home, which passed within blocks of Mitchell's Market but didn't require him to stop there. The timeline was tight. According to the prosecution, Robert Mitchell was shot around 11:30 p.m. Marcus was definitively at work at that time. The drive from the grocery store to Mitchell's Market was at least 12 minutes. Then Marcus would have had to park, enter the store, rob and kill Robert, and get back to his car. Then drive home, where neighbors confirmed seeing him arrive around midnight. The math didn't add up. It was physically possible, but incredibly tight, and it required Marcus to have committed a brutal murder in the brief window between leaving work and arriving home, all while leaving absolutely no physical evidence behind. Chin argued all of this. But the prosecution had something more powerful than logic: emotion. The prosecutors showed the jury pictures of Robert Mitchell with his grandchildren. They brought Robert's widow to the stand, where she sobbed while describing finding out her husband was dead. They painted Marcus as a cold-blooded killer who shot an innocent old man for the money in a cash register, and they played that confession. The jury heard Marcus's voice saying, "I was there," over and over. The context didn't matter. The coercion didn't matter. All the jury heard was a confession. On March 3, 1996, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Marcus Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She was holding 14-month-old Amaya, who was babbling and playing with her mother's hair, completely unaware that her father was being taken away forever. "I couldn't breathe," Lisa said. "I watched them put handcuffs on Marcus, and I couldn't breathe. He looked back at me, and he mouthed 'I love you,' and then they took him away. Amaya kept saying 'Dada,' and reaching for him, and I collapsed." Lisa's life fell apart quickly after that. She couldn't afford the apartment on her own. She had to quit one of her jobs to take care of Amaya full-time. They moved in with Lisa's mother in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city. Lisa fell into a deep depression, barely able to function. Amaya grew up visiting her father in prison. Her earliest memories are of sitting in a visitor's room, separated from her daddy by thick glass, talking to him through a phone. She didn't understand why she couldn't hug him. Why she couldn't sit in his lap like other kids did with their fathers. I thought that was normal for a long time. Amaya said in a 2018 interview, when she was 23 years old, the same age her father was when he was convicted. I thought everyone's dad lived in a place with guards and metal detectors. It wasn't until I was maybe 7 or 8 that I realized my dad was in prison, and that meant he'd done something bad. Except my dad kept telling me he didn't do it. And I believed him, but nobody else did. Marcus adjusted to prison as best he could. He had no choice. He maintained his innocence from day one, which actually worked against him. In the prison system, maintaining innocence when you've been convicted often means you can't access certain rehabilitation programs. Those programs require you to take responsibility for your crime, but Marcus couldn't take responsibility for something he didn't do. He spent his days working in the prison kitchen, reading every book he could get his hands on, and studying law. Marcus became a jailhouse lawyer, learning everything he could about the legal system, about appeals, about constitutional rights. He helped other inmates with their cases while desperately working on his own. He filed appeal after appeal. Every single one was denied. The justice system, Marcus learned, is designed to be final. Once you're convicted, the burden of proof shifts dramatically. It's no longer the state's job to prove you're guilty, it's your job to prove you're innocent. And proving innocence from inside a prison cell, with no resources, no investigators, and no money, is nearly impossible. Years turned into a decade. Marcus watched Amaya grow up in 30-minute increments through prison glass. He missed her first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first school play, her first crush, her graduation from middle school. Lisa tried to move on with her life. She eventually started dating someone else, a kind man named Robert who accepted that Lisa came with a complicated past. But she never married him. Some part of her couldn't let go of Marcus, couldn't accept that the man she loved was a murderer. Deep down, I always knew, Lisa said. I knew Marcus didn't do it. I knew the man I loved couldn't have killed someone. But what could I do? I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a detective. I was just a woman trying to raise her daughter alone. The breakthrough came in 2013, 18 years after Marcus was convicted. A young journalist named Sarah Chen was working on a series about wrongful convictions for a Detroit newspaper. She'd heard about Marcus's case through a prisoner advocacy group and decided to look into it. What she found shocked her. Sarah started by obtaining all the police reports from the original investigation. She noticed something immediately. Detective Walsh's investigation of Marcus Thompson had been thorough, but his investigation of other potential suspects had been almost non-existent. There had been other leads in the case, other suspects. But Detective Walsh had barely followed up on any of them once he decided Marcus was his guy. Sarah found the security footage from the grocery store where Marcus worked. Even 18 years later, it was clear Marcus was at work until 11:45 p.m., and the timestamp was accurate. She verified it with the store's records, which had been preserved. Then Sarah did something that Detective Walsh apparently never bothered to do properly. She drove the route from the grocery store to Mitchell's Market and timed it. At that time of night, with minimal traffic, it took 14 minutes, not 12. She drove the route 10 different times, at the same time of night. The fastest she ever made it was 13 minutes. For Marcus to have committed the murder, he would have had to leave work at 11:45, drive 14 minutes to arrive at 11:59, commit the robbery and murder in less than 60 seconds, and then drive home to arrive by 12:15, when his neighbor definitively saw him pulling into the parking lot. It was theoretically possible, but just barely. And it would have required split-second precision and incredible luck. More importantly, it would have left evidence. You can't commit a murder that quickly without leaving something behind. Fingerprints, DNA, fibers, something. But there was nothing. Marcus had left no trace because he had never been there. Sarah then reviewed the original witness statements. The anonymous caller who reported seeing someone near the store had never been properly identified or interviewed. Sarah tracked down and reviewed every piece of paper from the case file and found something extraordinary. There had been another witness, a teenage girl named Deshawn Williams, who saw someone running from the store right after the shooting. Deshawn had given a statement to police. She described the person she saw, taller than average, thin build, wearing a red jacket. She'd been certain about the red jacket because it had white stripes on the sleeves. Marcus Thompson had never owned a red jacket. He was average height and stocky, not tall and thin. But Detective Walsh had buried this statement in the file and never presented it to the prosecution or defense. Sarah found Deshawn Williams, now in her 30s and living in California. Deshawn remembered that night vividly. "I told the police exactly what I saw," Deshawn said. "The detective seemed really interested at first, but then when I described the guy, he kind of shut down. He asked me if I was sure about what I saw, and I said yes. Then he told me I'd probably just seen someone running for a bus or something, and I should go home and forget about it. I was 16. I listened." Sarah Chen's investigation went deeper. She filed Freedom of Information requests and obtained records of Detective Walsh's other cases. What she found was a pattern that made her blood run cold. Detective Walsh had been involved in at least 12 other cases where convictions were obtained primarily through confessions, with minimal physical evidence. In 8 of those cases, the defendants later claimed their confessions were coerced. In 3 of those cases, the convictions had already been overturned after new evidence emerged. Detective Walsh had retired in 2005 with full honors, praised for his dedication to justice and his impressive conviction rate. But that conviction rate, Sarah discovered, was built on questionable tactics, buried evidence, and a willingness to close cases rather than solve them correctly. Sarah published her first article about Marcus Thompson's case in October 2013. It was titled, "An Innocent Man? How One Detective's Rush to Justice May Have Sent the Wrong Person to Prison for Life." The article went viral locally. Within days, it had been picked up by national news outlets. Legal advocacy groups took notice. The Innocence Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals through DNA testing and legal reform, contacted Marcus's family. Finally, after 18 years, Marcus had hope. The Innocence Project assigned a team of attorneys to Marcus's case. Led by a fierce advocate named Jennifer Torres, they filed a motion for post-conviction relief, arguing that Marcus's conviction was based on a coerced confession, and that exculpatory evidence had been withheld from the defense. Getting the case reopened took another year of legal battles. Prosecutors fought back hard. They argued that Marcus had been given a fair trial, that the jury had considered all the evidence, and that the confession was valid. They argued that Sarah Chen's journalism was biased and that her conclusions were speculation. But in November 2014, a judge finally agreed to hold an evidentiary hearing. Marcus was allowed to be present in court, his first time outside the prison in 18 years except for medical emergencies. Lisa and Amaya were in the courtroom. Amaya was 19 years old, a sophomore in college studying criminal justice. She'd grown up determined to understand the system that had taken her father from her. When Marcus walked into the courtroom in chains, Amaya started crying. Lisa grabbed her hand and squeezed it. Marcus looked at his daughter, this young woman he'd watched grow up through prison glass, and his eyes filled with tears. "I barely recognized him," Amaya later said. "He looked so much older than I remembered. Tired. But when he looked at me, his eyes were the same. My dad was still in there." The evidentiary hearing lasted 3 days. Jennifer Torres presented all the evidence Sarah Chen had uncovered. She brought in expert witnesses who testified about false confessions, explaining how 11-hour interrogations and misleading tactics can break down even innocent people. She presented the security footage, the timeline, the buried witness statement from Deshawn Williams. She showed that Detective Walsh had focused exclusively on Marcus while failing to properly investigate other leads. Most dramatically, she presented new evidence. Another man had been arrested in 2010 for a nearly identical crime at a different convenience store. That man, Curtis Jenkins, had worn a red jacket with white stripes when he was arrested. Curtis Jenkins had been 16 years old in 1995, living just 6 blocks from Mitchell's Market. Curtis Jenkins was currently serving 30 years for that 2010 robbery and murder. Jennifer Torres had interviewed Curtis Jenkins in prison. While he refused to confess to Robert Mitchell's murder directly, he admitted he had committed other robberies in that neighborhood in the 90s. He admitted he owned a red jacket with white stripes. When shown a photo of Mitchell's Market, he said the store looked familiar. It wasn't a confession, but combined with everything else, it painted a compelling alternative theory. Police had convicted the wrong person, and the real killer had gone free for 15 years before finally being caught for a different crime. The prosecution fought back, arguing that Curtis Jenkins's vague statements proved nothing. They argued that Marcus's confession was still valid regardless of any timeline issues. They argued that the jury had spoken, and that should be the end of it. But the judge, Judge Patricia Morrison, saw through it. She'd reviewed every piece of evidence carefully. She'd read the interrogation transcripts. She'd watched the security footage. On December 19, 2014, Judge Morrison issued her ruling. "After carefully considering all the evidence presented," she said, her voice steady and clear, "this court finds that Marcus Thompson's confession was not given freely and voluntarily. but was the result of coercive interrogation tactics. Furthermore, the court finds that exculpatory evidence was withheld from the defense, denying Mr. Thompson his constitutional right to a fair trial. Lisa gripped Amaya's hand so hard it hurt. Marcus stood perfectly still, afraid to hope. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued. The timeline presented by the prosecution was, at best, highly improbable, and at worst, physically impossible. When combined with the complete absence of physical evidence and the emergence of an alternative suspect whose description matches that given by an eyewitness, this court cannot in good conscience allow this conviction to stand. Judge Morrison looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, your conviction is hereby vacated. You are released from custody immediately. The courtroom erupted. Lisa and Amaya started sobbing. Marcus's legs gave out, and he had to be caught by a bailiff. 20 years. He'd spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The prosecution could have retried Marcus, but they chose not to. They knew they couldn't win. The evidence of Marcus's innocence was overwhelming. 1 week later, all charges against Marcus Thompson were officially dismissed. After 19 years, 8 months, and 17 days, Marcus Thompson walked out of prison a free man. The day Marcus was released, Lisa and Amaya were waiting outside the prison gates. It was December 26, 2014, and snow was falling softly. When Marcus walked through those gates, carrying a single plastic bag with his few possessions, he saw his daughter for the first time without glass between them since she was 9 months old. Amaya ran to him and threw her arms around him. Marcus held his daughter and cried harder than he'd cried in 2 decades. Lisa joined them, and the three of them stood in the snow, holding each other, a family reunited by justice that came far too late. He smelled different than I remembered, Amaya said. But when he hugged me, I was 5 years old again, and my daddy was home. Marcus's first months of freedom were harder than anyone expected. He'd entered prison in 1995, when cell phones were rare and the internet was new. He left prison in 2014, and the world had completely changed. Smartphones, social media, digital everything. He didn't know how to use an ATM. He'd never seen a flat-screen TV. The first time he rode in a car with automatic windows, he was confused about why there was no crank handle. But the technology was the least of it. Marcus had severe PTSD from his 2 decades in prison. He couldn't sleep without a light on. Sudden loud noises made him panic. He couldn't be in crowded spaces without feeling anxious. He'd spent 20 years in a 6x8 cell. And now the open world felt too big, too overwhelming. Lisa and Amaya helped him adjust. They took things slowly. Lisa had never married Robert, and they'd broken up years before, so she moved Marcus into her apartment. They went to therapy together as a family, processing the trauma of what had been stolen from them. Amaya introduced her father to her boyfriend, a young man named DeAndre who treated her well. Marcus got to do something he dreamed about for 2 decades. He met his daughter's partner as a free man, able to shake his hand, look him in the eye, and ask him about his intentions. Such a small thing, something most fathers take for granted, but for Marcus it was everything. Marcus filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Detroit, the police department, and Detective Raymond Walsh personally. The lawsuit alleged wrongful conviction, coerced confession, withholding of exculpatory evidence, and violation of constitutional rights. The case took 3 years to wind through the courts. The city fought it aggressively, not wanting to set a precedent. But the evidence was overwhelming. Internal investigations revealed that Detective Walsh had a pattern of questionable tactics in multiple cases. Several other convictions he'd been involved in were now under review. In 2017, the city of Detroit settled with Marcus Thompson for $8.7 million. It sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but when you break it down, it equals roughly $1,200 for each day Marcus spent wrongfully imprisoned. $1,200 for each day he couldn't hold his daughter, couldn't kiss the woman he loved, couldn't feel grass under his feet or sun on his face. No amount of money could give him back those 20 years. Detective Raymond Walsh was never criminally charged. He was 71 years old when Marcus was exonerated, living in retirement in Florida. The statute of limitations had passed on most potential charges. He gave one interview to a local newspaper, in which he said he stood by his original investigation and that Marcus Thompson's confession had been voluntary. He refused to apologize. He refused to even acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Marcus used his settlement money to buy a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. He started a small nonprofit organization called Second Chances, dedicated to helping other wrongfully convicted individuals reintegrate into society after exoneration. Marcus understood better than anyone how hard it was to rebuild a life after losing decades to wrongful imprisonment. Through second chances, Marcus helped other exonerees find housing, employment, and mental health services. He spoke at colleges and law schools, telling his story, educating future lawyers and judges about the dangers of coerced confessions and tunnel vision in investigations. In 2018, Marcus was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering reforms to interrogation practices. He spoke for 45 minutes, describing in detail what Detective Walsh had done to him, how an innocent man can be broken down and manipulated into confessing to something he didn't do. "I'm not special," Marcus told the committee. "I'm not uniquely weak or uniquely naive. I was a regular person in an impossible situation. And if it could happen to me, it can happen to anyone. It can happen to your son, your brother, your father. Until we change how interrogations are conducted, until we require them to be recorded, until we train officers to seek truth instead of confessions, this will keep happening." His testimony was powerful. 6 months later, Michigan passed legislation requiring all interrogations for serious crimes to be video recorded from start to finish. It was a small victory, but an important one. Amaya graduated from college in 2017 with a degree in criminal justice. She'd been inspired by her father's wrongful conviction to dedicate her life to reforming the justice system from within. She went on to law school, graduating in 2020. At her law school graduation, Marcus sat in the audience and cried. His daughter, the baby girl he'd held for only 9 months before being torn away, was now a lawyer. She would fight for others the way people had finally fought for him. "My dad missed so much of my life," Amaya said in her valedictory speech. "He missed my childhood, my teenage years, my first heartbreak, my high school graduation. But he never missed what mattered most. He never stopped being my father. Through letters and phone calls and prison visits, he taught me about integrity, about standing up for what's right, about never giving up even when the whole world tells you to. My dad lost 20 years, but he never lost himself. And that's the strongest thing I've ever seen." There wasn't a dry eye in that auditorium. Amaya now works as a public defender, representing people who can't afford attorneys, the same situation her father had been in. She fights every day for her clients, knowing that any one of them could be innocent, could be the next Marcus Thompson. Marcus and Lisa never got married, but they remained close friends and co-parents. They both changed too much during those 20 years apart to resurrect their romantic relationship, but their bond remained strong. Lisa had her own life now, her own career, her own identity beyond being Marcus Thompson's girlfriend. And Marcus respected that, but they spent holidays together. They celebrated Amaya's victories together. When Amaya got engaged to DeAndre in 2019, Marcus and Lisa walked her down the aisle together at the wedding. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast. "I miss so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss watching my baby girl grow up. I miss teaching her to ride a bike. I missed helping her with homework and scaring away boys and all the things dads are supposed to do. But I'm here now. And I got to walk my daughter down the aisle. So while I'll never get those years back, I'm grateful for every moment I have now." Marcus's story is extraordinary, but it's not unique. Since 1989, more than 3,000 people in the United States have been exonerated after being wrongfully convicted. 3,000 people who lost years or decades of their lives to a system that failed them. The National Registry of Exonerations tracks these cases, and the data is sobering. The average length of incarceration for exonerated individuals is 9 years. Some, like Marcus, lost 20 years or more. 25 men have been exonerated from death row after being proven innocent, meaning they came within days or hours of being executed by the state for crimes they didn't commit. False or misleading forensic evidence plays a role in roughly 24% of wrongful convictions. Eyewitness misidentification is involved in nearly 70%. And false confessions, like Marcus's, are a factor in about 13% of wrongful conviction cases. 13% might not sound like much, but that's 13% too many. Why do innocent people confess? The research is clear. Certain interrogation tactics can break down even the strongest person. Sleep deprivation, isolation, lying about evidence, minimization tactics where police suggest the crime wasn't that bad, maximization tactics where police paint a terrifying picture of what will happen if you don't cooperate. All of these techniques can lead innocent people to confess, especially when combined with youth, mental disability, or mental illness. Marcus was none of those things. He was an adult with no disabilities and no mental illness. But after 11 hours in that interrogation room, with Detective Walsh lying to him, manipulating him, promising him he could go home if he just said what they wanted to hear, Marcus broke. And once those words were out of his mouth, once that false confession existed, it became nearly impossible to undo. Juries believe confessions. Even when the evidence contradicts the confession, even when the timeline doesn't work, juries believe confessions because they think no one would admit to something they didn't do. But they do. All the time. Because human beings under enough pressure will say whatever they need to say to make the pain stop. Detective Walsh's other cases are still being reviewed. As of 2023, 2 more of his convictions have been overturned, and 3 others are under active investigation. The families of those wrongfully convicted have filed lawsuits. The Detroit Police Department has been forced to implement major reforms to its interrogation and investigation procedures. But Detective Walsh himself remains unapologetic. In his only interview after Marcus's exoneration, he said, "I did my job the best way I knew how. Sometimes the system makes mistakes, but I always acted in good faith." Good faith. As if good intentions matter when an innocent man loses 20 years of his life. Sarah Chin, the journalist whose investigation helped free Marcus, won multiple awards for her reporting. She continues to investigate wrongful convictions and has helped uncover evidence that led to 3 more exonerations in other cases. She and Marcus remain friends to this day. "Marcus's case changed my life," Sarah said. "It showed me how broken our justice system can be, but also how it can be fixed if people care enough to demand the truth. Marcus never gave up, and that inspired me to never give up either." In 2021, Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on wrongful convictions in Washington, D.C. In the audience was Robert Mitchell's grandson, Christopher Mitchell, who was now 35 years old. Christopher approached Marcus after the speech. The meeting was tense at first. Christopher had grown up believing Marcus Thompson murdered his grandfather. He'd lived with that belief for over 2 decades. Learning the truth had been devastating in a different way because it meant the real killer had never been caught, never been punished. "I hated you for so long," Christopher told Marcus. "And then when I found out you were innocent, I didn't know what to feel. My grandfather's killer is still out there, and you lost 20 years. And my family lost my grandfather, and nobody won except the person who actually did it." Marcus listened. Then he said something Christopher would never forget. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said. "Your grandfather didn't deserve what happened to him. And you're right, nobody won. You lost your grandfather. I lost 20 years. The real killer got away. We're all victims of the same broken system. I don't blame you for hating me. I just hope you understand now that we're on the same side. We both want justice." Christopher and Marcus talked for over an hour. By the end, they shook hands. Christopher even apologized for the years he'd spent hating an innocent man. "It wasn't your fault," Marcus told him. "You believed what you were told. We all did." Today, Marcus Thompson is 51 years old. He looks older than his years, his hair silver, deep lines in his face that weren't there when he was 23. Prison ages you in ways that freedom never does. But he's made peace with his story. He can't get those 20 years back, can't undo what was done to him. But he can use his experience to help others. He can speak the truth about wrongful convictions. He can fight for reforms that might prevent the next Marcus Thompson from losing decades of his life. Amaya has given Marcus 2 grandchildren now, a boy and a girl. Marcus gets to be the grandfather he never had the chance to be a father. He takes them to the park, pushes them on swings, reads them bedtime stories, all the things he couldn't do with Amaya. "Being a grandfather is healing something in me I didn't know was broken," Marcus said in a recent interview. "Every moment with them is a gift. Every hug, every laugh, every scraped knee I get to bandage. These are the moments that were stolen from me, and I'm getting them back in a different way." Marcus's case raises questions that we as a society need to answer. How do we balance the need to solve crimes and bring closure to victims' families with the need to ensure we convict the right person? How do we train law enforcement to seek truth instead of convictions? How do we protect vulnerable suspects from coercive interrogation tactics? There are no easy answers, but there are steps we can take. Requiring video recording of all interrogations. Reforming eyewitness identification procedures. Implementing stronger oversight of forensic evidence. Providing better funding and resources for public defenders so they can properly investigate their clients' cases.